I've seen the professional tag. I've seen that as well too. That looks like a gnarly sport because you're
Professional
bobbing
tag?
and weaving through they basically set up like a parkour course with like scaffolding and whatnot. And these guys are sprinting and swinging and jumping and doing everything they can. It's pretty intense, but
You're talking about like You're It tag.
yes, tag.
All right.
And I feel like I'd make it 30 seconds before I clothesline myself watching these guys move through the course.
Yeah. Like,
Folks, there's curling in the Olympics. Come on now.
Yeah.
And champions are from Minnesota too.
Exactly.
World champs.
A buddy of mine used to like do it at the St. Paul Curling Club, which is at one point was like the epicenter of curling in the world. It's right there in like Highland Park, right by McAllister.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Kind of makes sense when there's nothing else to do for 5 months out of the year.
Right.
Hang out on the frozen lake.
Exactly.
That's where I learned
That's
ice
only if
fishing.
you. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say I learned during those 5 months that ice fishing isn't at all about fishing. It's just standing in a cold hut drinking all day.
Correct.
Yep.
I'm like, oh, now I see why people are so avid about ice fishing. Okay.
There's two things you can do with that big hole in the ice. You can drop a fishing line down there, or you can put a keg of beer in it.
Yeah, we still have people trickling in.
Yeah, a couple more people trickling in. Let's make sure. Do we have the Rocket Man team here? Is Chris somewhere? I see Chris.
There he is.
There he is. Chris is here. We got Hugo, Caleb, myself. All right, 12:05.
No chat today.
We'll get started. This is our we always start about 5 minutes late just to give everyone time to trickle in here. Thank you everyone for coming to the LaunchPad Mac Admin Meetup, Jamf Admin Meetup, hosted by Rocket Man. I see a lot of familiar faces in here. I'm not sure if we have any newcomers or first timers, but if you are a first timer, welcome. Glad you found your way in here. Our format for this is we're going to go through the LaunchPad times, formerly the Gravity times, where we bring your Apple news and rumors down to earth and just talk about latest updates. If we miss anything throughout this whole presentation, please feel free to raise your hand. We'll be looking for collaboration from the audience. The beauty of this meetup is we get a lot of really smart people on this call and everybody's seeing different things in different environments. So yeah, we just want to keep our thumb on what's going on in the Jamf enterprise administration world. So we will be having Hugo will be presenting the LaunchPad times this week. And then we have special guest Brock Walters will be doing our keynote presentation. Thank you for sharing your screen, Hugo. If you've worked with Rocket Man in any capacity, you're familiar with Hugo. Hugo's a senior Jamf engineer here at Rocket Man. He has a lot of years of experience managing large and complex Jamf environments, things from schools to large enterprise clients. He presented at Penn State, so good job, Hugo, getting those chops. And you've been doing the last couple LaunchPad times presentations, so I think this has kind of turned into your spiel a bit. So without further ado, Hugo, I will turn it over to you to go through this.
Thank you for the very nice intro, Eric. Yeah, I'm Hugo. I'm an engineer here with Rocket Man, and we have a pretty loaded LaunchPad times this week. A lot of stuff happening. First things first, Apple updates. iOS and iPad OS are 16.6.1 as of yesterday, and macOS Ventura is 13.5.2. It's recommended you update. These updates include bug fixes and security updates, and that's pretty much all the details. If you want to read more, the article for security updates is on the screen, HT201222. That'll take you to all the security updates for all the operating systems Apple has available right now. Additional Apple updates. So next Tuesday, September 12th, we have this year's Apple event. I believe they're going to be going over iOS stuff, watchOS stuff, and hopefully some more Vision Pro. Anybody else have any rumors or predictions about this?
Our ACE reps pretty blatantly said that Mac OS is going to be announced, like that a Sonoma release date is going to be announced, and they're going to talk about Sonoma as well.
Ooh, very nice.
Our rep also specifically mentioned watch. So there will be something related to watch, but not sure what.
Can we also just take a moment and say praise God or praise whatever deity you worship to, or just thank the Apple gods themselves that they're finally taking the iPhone to a USB-C charger?
Is that happening?
Yes, finally.
There,
Wow.
I mean,
So I can
they were
get rid of all
they're-
these dongles now.
they were forced into it
Yeah.
by the EU, but yeah.
Well, there we go. There's some
I've heard
anticipation there.
I've heard the Pro models only. Is anybody else hearing that?
I haven't heard that, but I worry that the USB-C connection is just less robust than the Lightning port.
Yeah, Thunderbolt 4. I heard some rumors about Thunderbolt 4 on the Pros.
I'd heard that the non-pros, the data transfer rate will be limited to USB 2, but then for the pros, it'll be full Thunderbolt. But I don't know if that's true.
That can't be true. We can't be going backwards.
Well, it's all rumors until they tell us.
Oh, Brent just posted the same thing in the chat. It's got to
Oh
be
my
real.
Gosh, that's terrible. Why would they do that?
Video files, apparently. That's what I've been hearing. It justifies the Thunderbolt.
Interesting.
The phone speeds now are USB 2.0, so it's really no different for the non-pro phones.
They're just not upgrading everything. Okay.
Right, just switching connectors to USB-C is the rumors.
All right. Tony says, got to justify the $100 price increase. Well, yeah, of course. So moving on, Jamf updates, pretty big one. Very happy to see all of these updates. So the version we're on today is now 10.50. These are rolling out, I think, this week or next week. And involved in that is an upgrade to OS compatibility. So now we'll be accommodating 14, iOS 17, iPad iOS, and tvOS 17, right? So the big one here is macOS 14, at least for me. Lots of huge changes here, like huge. We have configuration profile payload additions, two major additions to the restrictions payload and one to the security and privacy. If anyone has been involved in CIS or has just wanted these functionalities for a long time, we'll finally be able to prevent account modification, the creation of users, disable the iCloud photo library, prevent changing the device name, prevent modifying startup disk, prevent modifying time machine, prevent users from modifying their Touch ID, and we can finally disable Siri. This will be under the functionality tab, and just talking about this makes me excited. I've been looking forward to a lot of these for a long time. I've been scripting a lot of this stuff or just kind of creating workarounds for it. On the sharing tab, we'll be able to prevent modifying the Bluetooth settings, modify file sharing settings, modify internet sharing settings, modify printer settings, modify remote management, and modify remote Apple events. And again, these are all CIS benchmarks we can finally control within a configuration profile instead of creating these robust workflows with scripts, extension attributes, smart computer groups, and constantly remediating these things because end users can change them right now. So this is huge. Finally, we have the security and privacy payload being updated with File Vault. We'll be able to force enable File Vault in Setup Assistant. It's just going to be a little toggle in the configuration profile payload window. You can toggle it on, set this configuration profile to be deployed during pre-stage enrollment, and bada bing, it's going to force File Vault on. So now users won't have to hang at that window in between logging in and the desktop loading. So another huge addition. There's even more profile payload additions. At the bottom of the window there, you'll see the release notes link. Go ahead and check those out because there's just a ton of information on that page. They added the management ID to the general inventory tab for computers. And an example use case of this is for the new lap system, right? The management ID needs to be specified in order to use that. Previously, the only way to get this information was from the API. So with the pushback from the new laps integration, I think Jamf's going to start making more and more incremental changes to accommodate everyone's complaints pretty much here. So that was a big one. Here's another big one, the API command additions. And this is pretty cool. So we got the return to service when utilizing the erase device API. And what this is going to do is when you push this to an iPad, it's going to wipe the iPad, connect it back to Wi-Fi, and re-enroll it, skipping a lot of the setup assistant screens we weren't able to skip before. So you'll literally just be able to run this command and get these iPads back to a usable state with minimal physical interaction. Another big one here is obliteration behavior. This is for Mac OS, and this is when the erase all content and settings command fails. So just literally they obliterate it. So again, more on that on Jamf's documentation. For the Microsoft side of things, Entra IDE is now what Azure AD used to be, and Intune updates. So they provided some Jamf AAD improvements here. We've got SSO extension improvements, and the registration has been simplified. This is a big one for me, and I'm sure a lot of other people that integrate with Intune. Now there will be less prompts populated. Before there was, I believe, 3 different prompts end users had to authenticate with, and this is going to narrow it down to, I believe, 1. Haven't fully tested this yet, but it's going to save some time and some headache for end users being like, why do I have to enter my email and password in 3 different windows? Why do I have to click always allow on this pop-up, which was a really big hindrance. A lot of end users would click just allow instead of always allow, and it just caused so many issues. So happy to see Jamf addressing this. And the integration documentation has been updated, right? So the device compliance documentation from Jamf wasn't up to date with all the settings in Entra, formerly Azure. So there's a little bit of figuring out you had to do when performing the full integration. So nice to see they addressed that as well. And there's a ton of stuff packed into the 1050 update. I just had to get through this because we have a presentation today. Is there any additional Jamf updates I missed that you want to bring to light?
Or any questions you have about the updates Hugo went through.
And I just threw a fire hose at everyone and said, here's the information. So yeah, I just went through a lot.
I was just curious. It seems like some of the new MDM keys and so forth have an option which I've seen before, but it's never really worked in configuration profiles, which you can set something but still allow the user to modify it, right? Like firewall has had a broken setting that sounds like it allows users to turn their firewall on and off, even though you've activated it with the configuration profile. So I was just wondering, has anyone seen that work? Like allow modifying device name. So you could you potentially set a setting and then still allow them? You remember back in like MCX or manage preferences, there used to be like a manage once command, right? Where you could set something in a configuration profile, but a user could still modify that setting. So.
Right. So I'm losing the word for it right now, but to your point, these are all macOS 14 or later profiles, and that is because I can't think of it right now, but essentially the configuration profiles will be locked in. They'll be checking in.
Okay.
And,
all right.
and the end user won't be able to do it. And if somehow they do change it, the Jamf will be able to read that change and the configuration profile take over. And I can't for the life of me think of the name
You talking about declarative?
It's like a GPO.
Thank you.
check.
Declarative device management. Thank you very much. Yes.
Yep.
Whoever said that, thank you. So that's going to come into play big time in macOS 14, doing exactly what you're asking about. It's going to force these configuration profiles to apply.
Right. Okay.
Any more
Speaking of which,
questions?
Speaking of which, just on that note, something that I learned, I don't know if everybody knows this or not, but when you do the send blank push on 13 or later, it is a DDM push instead, which I use all the time just for manual communication with endpoint.
I noticed that as well. That's great.
Yeah, some of the DDM features have already been enabled, and I it's going to be more and more as I think at the GC release and the RC release and after, they're still going to be turning that stuff on.
So question for anyone who's been working on that, what is the difference between the DDM version of the blank push and the regular version? I don't know, what was it before DDM? Just device management?
Mobile device management.
Mobile device management, yeah. MDM.
But send blank push basically just did that. It just sent as far as I understand it, it just sent a beacon, but that was it. Now it's saying, okay, report back.
Oh, so it actually gives you a response. So if you're like, hey, is the device active? You'll send the blank push and then it'll send back a response and say, yeah, it is active.
I don't even think send blank push did. Now it does. Yeah, it didn't used to. It would just push
No.
it out. Now,
No, it
now
would just
can
push
be,
out. Yeah.
Yeah, now it can be autonomous. That's the big difference.
Oh, that's pretty
Yeah.
cool.
And now with all the declarative device management push and pulls from Jamf, it'll be able to say these settings changed, apply this configuration profile again, which is huge for maintaining security and whatnot. Well, if that's it.
Oh, sorry. I just don't know if it's overstating it, but I think that really one way of thinking of this is that there's more data being exchanged through the MDM channel now than there was before, right? It was kind of a one-way street before where the device was told to check into its management system and then stuff would happen. But now they've kind of refactored it so that data can be pushed back from the client after that initial communication.
That makes sense because so what I would see, especially with like OS updates and stuff, it's like it would push a command to do the OS update and then push another command to like check if the OS update has been pushed. It just keeps pushing all these commands to like get an update from it. But now the client can actually push an update back and say, hey, I've updated my OS.
Yep.
Yeah, the big buzzword they're using is autonomous.
Yeah. Cool. Well, that'll be great.
So now we'll jump into JNUC 2023. Eric, I'll hand it over to you now if you want to talk about our JNUC 2023 event.
Yeah, sure thing. So the last couple JNUCs that we've gone to, we've tried to host we have hosted a LaunchPad live event. Typically when we do that though, we want to try and fit it seamlessly into the week. A lot of times you get to JNUC and you've got, all sorts of goals to go to every single presentation. And then you get invited to happy hours and different after JNUC events and the week fills up fast. So I think our plan for this year is we kind of want to get our boots on the ground, get a feel for what the week looks like, and then find a time to do a LaunchPad live event that competes with as few of those events as possible. So we don't want to try and pull people away from popular JNUC events. So we'll be doing a LaunchPad live event. We will probably use our email system to send out the when and the where once we figure out a good time for that. So if you're going to JNUC and you'll be there, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to meet and greet you guys all in person. And then, we'll be doing a LaunchPad live event sometime during the week. We'll also be having a Rocket Man booth this year, which is very exciting. For the first time in Rocket Man history, we are not presenting at JNUC, which is kind of crazy. But we will be sponsoring JNUC with a booth. So we'll be around there to chit chat if anybody wants to come up to us and see what we have going on. I think we're gonna be doing a Mac SE giveaway or a Mac SE with a bunch of games loaded on it. We're gonna be doing some giveaways. Hopefully this will be a fun booth to come and visit and chat with us. Trying to think of anything else crazy. I mean, if you guys have been to JNUC, you know that it's a packed week. It's an amazing event. There's always something going on. So we definitely want to try and keep it to where everyone is not overwhelmed by the amount of events going on. So we'll try and fit our event in there seamlessly. If this is your first JNUC that you're going to, buckle up. Lots of stuff going on, a lot of fun. You bring extra bags for all the gear and swag and free stuff that you can collect through the week. Really cool event. So we're looking forward to that. That's only a couple weeks away, which is also crazy. I don't know. How did I do, guys? Did I hit all of the notes that we have for upcoming JNUC?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Great,
Eric.
Eric. Can we get a raise of hands from anyone who's going to JNUC this year? Virtual raise.
I think we have to remove the spotlight.
Oh yeah, we were still spotlighted on Hugo. Nice, got a
Bunch
couple
of hands.
We got some thumbs up
Awesome.
since the end. Yeah, well, make sure you stop by and say hi to us. We want to see you all at JNUC. It's going to be a fun time. We got a
Oh, I forgot.
chessboard on its own, which is going to be cool.
We made stickers too. Every time we go to a conference, we're the only guys that don't have stickers. We need to get some stickers. So we'll have stickers this year.
Yeah, we got lots of stickers, lots of stuff.
One thing I noticed last year was after noon on Thursday, everybody just cleared out catching early flights and getting out of flight. So I saw in your thing that you're going to do a TBD Thursday at 3. I don't know how much response you're going to get at that point.
Yeah, it's there's like stuff going on Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night. So it's like, I don't know. Maybe we could do something one of those days.
I'll be there Saturday night.
Saturday night.
Beautiful.
Oh man. I will also be there Saturday night. So maybe we can have an event with just the two of us.
Sounds good. Look me up.
I think they'll probably do the big JNUC party that they do probably Wednesday night.
That's always on the Wednesday. Yep.
Yeah, so we definitely don't want to compete with that. So it'll probably be either that Tuesday or that Thursday. But again, TBD. We'll figure out a time that makes the most sense, and then we'll send out a mass email and be chatting about it. 13th JNUC for Jason. Wow. That's definitely probably on a leaderboard.
Casper Nation User Conference. We'll segue this into our feature requests. So if anyone has any feature requests they'd like to bring to light and get a couple upvotes on, please share them now. Here we go.
Oh, I wish I'd known about this. I would have. I have a few pets in there that I'd love to get some votes for. Dang it. Oh, man.
We should have warned you, Brock.
Oh, Chris, this is such a good thing. You know what I'll do is I'll come to the next meetup and bring them all.
Perfect.
Okay.
So we have one here, add Jamf Pro mass action to enable computer management status in inventory records.
I really missed that since it's been gone. Trouton put that one up. I was going to do one myself and I saw he'd already put one up, but I use this all the time. If we got machines that have been AWOL for a while, I'll unmanage them. Something checks back in, I'll remanage it. I do it daily and it's gone now that they changed that in 49.
Wow.
Well, I think it's kind of, based on the management account. So now that the management account has been officially deprecated, I think this is almost going to have to become a standalone attribute. Am I wrong about that?
Well, I saw that a few people have worked around it by just writing simple scripts that use the API command because you can now manage and unmanage, and you don't need to send a username anymore with that because it doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
But it still is able to unmanage and manage. So it'd just be nice if there was a mass action for it there just to check that box.
I agree. I think this is a good one.
Anybody else have some feature requests they'd like to spotlight?
Oh man, but be prepared to make this section an hour long next month.
Perfect. We won't have any keynote presentation planned.
The Brock Walters
yeah.
Part 2 Electric
Brock
Boogaloo.
Walters is 10-year-old feature requests.
I would just put up another request from last time about being able to clone configuration profiles for Jamf Connect and log in and etc. Because I just got 2.27 to fix the 14 login issues. So of course I had to build it from scratch, and I just remember each time like this is kind of ridiculous.
I put in we have a feature request that's getting a little bit of traction, which is to be able to like you can go into smart groups and see what they're linked to be able to do that with scripts as well.
That's a huge one, right? And I've literally had one in that I used to beg people in product to do, which was just give me a link to the script from the policy.
Right.
Just if I've got a script associated with a policy, it's just a URL to get to that page. Let me click on the script there and open it. I've never understood why that hasn't been done yet, but
especially now that they have the logic in there to do this with smart groups, it should be easy to do with other things too, right?
Yeah.
I also dropped a link to our server map tool, which does do this if you're looking to do it not through the GUI. I mean, it creates a report and then shows you which things are orphaned and not. And it also shows you which policies the scripts are in.
Hey, Chris, can you? So this is a little bit like Leslie's prune thing, right?
Yeah, it's similar, but it shows a bit more and isn't a GUI.
Does can you give this a single value and let it find all the associated things to that single object?
So you put in your URL, username, and password, and it just outputs a report.
Okay, got it.
You're not like inputting a specific object or something. It just outputs a report, but the report will tell you every policy that the script is associated with, along with the smart groups and packages and everything else.
Got it.
So yeah, Hugo, if you scroll down to the active scripts section, this is where it will show you like what policies the scripts are in. So we use this because we do a lot of the things we do, or one of the things we do for clients is we do a health check where we just kind of like get read access to their Jamf server and go through everything and kind of give them a report. I use this tool just to kind of see, hey, where is everything in the server? So I don't waste my time on a bunch of stuff that's either not in use or just not in the right place, So it kind of helps with going through the Jamf server.
Nice, very cool.
We'll keep the ball moving here. Thank you everyone for attending our Launchpad today. We'll be handing it over to Brock now, and he will begin our main presentation.
All right, let's see if I can make this work here.
Brock, if you go ahead and share your screen and get all of that set up. In the meantime, so Brock Walters is our guest presenter today. We're very excited about that. I know Chris and Brock go way back. Brock worked at Jamf for, I think, 5 years. You've been doing system administration, Mac OS administration for a long time. Brock is currently the senior Mac OS endpoint engineer at Vanguard. And a fun fact about Brock is Brock actually taught Chris Shazi, our very own Chris Shazi, how to bash script.
I mean, come on. I mean, it was he. Yeah, I mean, technically true, maybe, but highly oversold. Chris was well on his way.
Planted the seed.
Yeah, planted the seed. That's a better way of saying it.
I guess a lot of it was I'd ask Brock like, hey, can you teach me how to bash script? And he'd be like, sure. write a script that does this. I'm gonna be like, okay, well, how do I do it? He's like, figure it out. But it was a great teaching tool.
In true Jamp instructor fashion. Chris learned that trick on his own later. I think one of the exercises was to write a quine, right? Which was a script that wrote itself out.
Yeah, I actually have used that since then on interview questions with people. I'll give them like 15 minutes to read that.
That's a fun one. Okay, well, so thank you. First of all, I want to thank everybody at Rocketman for, oh, by the way, can you guys see my screen okay? Or see this shared screen? Okay, awesome. Thank everybody at Rocketman for giving me a mulligan on this, because I was scheduled to do this last month and I had an emergency at work. I will tell everybody what it was because it was pretty funny. Where I work has the most complicated network I've ever encountered in my life. And given what we do, it kind of makes sense. I don't think I'm talking out of school here. This is a public number. Vanguard claims that it has $7 to $8 trillion under management. So it's a big responsibility. The network, what happened was someone changed proxy rules, which prevented all the Macs from communicating with software update. And we were using Nudge to try to deal with one of these CVE vulnerabilities. So we were telling people to update every 10 minutes and not giving them a path to get to the software update servers. And I didn't know that when that was happening, but that was the problem that I had to solve. And that is the reason that I missed the last meeting. So hopefully that explains a little bit the kind of emergency I was dealing with. I apologize for missing it. I'm sure the guys covered it gracefully, and I appreciate them giving me another shot at this. The second thing I want to say is there's a lot of smart people on the call. I know them from having taught them in classes or from LinkedIn. There's nothing earth-shattering in this presentation. I'm dumb. So there's nothing earth-shattering about creating a static group with an API script. But hopefully, if you're new to this game, what you will take away from this presentation maybe is something like how to apply some of these concepts, how to take information from one system and use it in Jamf to help with management. That's really what I want to get to if possible. So I want to give you a real world scenario that I had to deal with at work and the solution that I created for it. And maybe this will give you some ideas about how to do that yourself. So when Chris asked me to do this, and I'm sure a lot of you guys know Chad, who does a lot of these presentations for Rocketman. It's Chad, right? And Chris asked me what the title was going to be. And I said, well, I was kind of thinking of calling it "Don't Make Yourself a Cog in Your Own Machine." And Chris is like, man, you guys with the obscure names. He's like, I would just call it Dynamically Updating Static Groups with the Jamf API. So I have both. By the way, the art in these Rocketman slide decks is unbelievable. These slide decks are so good. This is Rocketman slides, not mine. All right, who am I? I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. I did work at Jamf for 5 years. Before that, I worked as a systems administrator at an aerospace engineering firm in Phoenix for about 5 years. I was kind of drafted by Jamf to be part of the education team because of that experience. I worked at Apple for 3.5 years on the channel demo team. And what that means is that I worked on a team that was responsible for all the devices that are on display in stores that are not the Apple retail store. There are about 550 Apple retail stores in the world. There are about 250,000 points of sale. So the team that I was on was responsible for managing the demos on the devices in those 250,000 points of sale. Certainly didn't do it by myself. That is, if you consider that to be a contiguous deployment, which it really isn't, it's probably the biggest deployment of Apple devices in the world. It's about 1.5 million devices. So I did that for a while. I did work at Stars, the TV channel, as their Apple architect and systems administrator. And now I am at Vanguard, kind of doing the same stuff, back to a pure engineering role. And I'm pretty excited about that. That's who I am, in case you don't know. Now, what does this thing mean, this dumb statement? Don't make yourself a cog in your own machine unless, what does this mean? Well, this is not my line. This comes from another colleague of Chris, of myself and Chris from Jamf. Some of you, many of you, I'm sure know Bill Smith, who is a really great presenter. He almost always presents at Jamf. He has kind of a very pleasant Southern drawl. It doesn't really matter what he's saying. It just sounds good. And he always presents some, very perfectly portrayed subject at Jamf. I highly recommend going to his presentation if he's doing one this year. And this line is his. And what he said is, never make yourself a cog in your own machine. What I think he means by that is, if you have built an automation, but there's one thing in the automation that you have to do to complete it, like click a button or run a script or do a thing in Jamf, you haven't really finished the task. So what we're going to talk about here today is maybe the tension between the idea of how much is it going to cost me to build an automation that's partially automated versus how much time do I have to build a fully automated solution that will run forever that I never have to fix again. But in general, I think Bill's idea is a good one. You shouldn't make yourself a cog in your own machine. If you can fully automate something, that's great. But if you've only got a limited scope for your project that you have to automate, maybe it does make sense to have a place where you have to click a button. So we're going to talk about that a little bit today. Give me just a second here. All right. Cool. So these are kind of the topics I want to hit. I had this all nailed down a month ago. I have no idea what I was going to talk about then, but these were the topics that I kind of wanted to hit. At a micro level, I want to talk a little bit about code style and why it's important. I'm going to be showing you pieces of a script that I wrote. Token authentication in simple Jamf API scripts. I'm sure a lot of you already have this handled, but I think I have a pretty good and reusable little chunk of code for doing this now, and I'm happy to share it. I will be posting some form of these slides and some form of the script after the presentation, just in case you want it. I'm going to talk a little bit about using OSA script. This script is interactive. In other words, it collects the username and password, which are used to obtain the token. It's still a thing. Talk a little bit about loops and arrays, and talk a little bit about handling the different Jamf API data types. On the macro level, I want to talk about applying creative solutions to unavoidable problems. And what I mean by that is like, wow, this thing that I want to do doesn't seem like I can do it in Jamf alone. How can I integrate other data or other systems with Jamf to get the result that someone is asking me for? That's really the crux of the matter here. I love static groups. They're super useful. Obviously, smart groups are kind of like the killer feature of Jamf, but I think static groups are kind of like the overlooked redheaded stepchild, especially given the fact that you can create them with the API on demand. So what this workflow that I've created does is effectively builds an automation that allows you to populate and depopulate static groups at will, which makes them dynamic, right? Some of the deep cut Jamf API endpoints. I hadn't looked at this API endpoint before, and I was really glad it existed. So, dig into your Jamf API documentation. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Using data from systems other than Jamf as the criteria for policy actions and scope. This is talking about, again, integrating other systems with the Jamf API. And very briefly, I'm going to touch on just the idea of, using something like AWS runners or Lambdas or GitHub actions and secret servers. All right. So what my problem was Microsoft Basic Authentication. Maybe some of you had to deal with this in your environment. Microsoft, I think about a year and a half ago, officially deprecated Basic Authentication, expecting everyone to move to modern certificate-based authentication. But for a number of reasons, many organizations couldn't do this. Maybe they hadn't updated their Exchange services. Maybe they had things that were requiring email automation that used basic authentication. That was the case at my organization. There was a service, several services actually, that were using email automation and basic authentication to send and receive those emails that couldn't be turned off because these were tied to business systems. Interestingly, Microsoft did not provide a configuration profile to do this. In other words, there was no local switch to say, I want this device to use basic authentication, but I want that device to use modern authentication. The only thing they gave you a key value for was disabling modern auth. And I hope that makes sense. If you weren't ready for modern auth, they gave you a key value that you could set to say, I don't want this device to do modern auth. But they didn't give you one to say, I don't want basic auth to be used ever. And we'll get more into that when we talk about the script. Microsoft authentication schemes use per session negotiation. And what that means is that the state or the authentication method that is used is determined by the session. If modern authentication is enabled in your environment and the computer is in, I'm not sure I understand. Oh, shut up, Siri. And the computer is in, or the device is in a situation where it is attempting to authenticate, it may fail over to basic authentication, even though modern authentication has been enabled. So that's what that means, per session negotiation. Microsoft also revealed that there was no client-side attribute for determining if an endpoint had logged in with basic authentication. So not only did they give us or not give us a key value for setting this, but there was nothing on the client that said whether basic or modern authentication had happened. So this was a problem because I was being asked by my messaging team, hey, can you disable basic authentication on the clients? And my answer was no, because there was no client-side attribute for determining that it had happened, and there was no key value for turning it off. Okay, what was the solution? Well, it turns out that the data that I needed to determine whether a client had used basic or modern auth existed, but it only existed on the server side. It existed in the Exchange logs. The messaging team was able to give me that data as a CSV, just show me a list of users that had used basic auth. And Microsoft's idea for disabling it was simply to manually remediate the user's Outlook account. Well, instead of having to manually remediate it, I used Paul Bowden's Office Reset package for resetting the Outlook account. So in other words, my solution was, okay, I don't have the data I need in Jamf, but I do have the data I need in some other system to target the devices. And there was a manual remediation for doing this, but I know of an automatic way to solve the same problem. So how do I build a group in Jamf that will allow me to deploy my automated solution? That's the goal. So what I did was I created a script that ingested the CSV. It was a single column list of email addresses. And that email address was fed to the Jamf API to look up which computers were associated to that email address in Jamf. I then created a static group based on those computers and then ran my policy, which had the Office Reset package for Outlook in the policy on that static group. And I did this not at a regular interval. I did it manually once a week until I was assured by the messaging team that basic authentication had been disabled in the environment. Once basic authentication was disabled in the environment, this problem went away. But until they turned basic authentication off at the server, computers were still going to try to do basic auth as a failover method. And that's what we were trying to stop. All right, so let's get into the code a little bit here. First thing is just, these are the only two pieces of data that someone else besides me would have needed to feed this thing to get it to work. In other words, a path to the CSV file that has a list of email addresses and the static group that you are going to be modifying. This script does not actually create a new static group. It modifies an existing static group, but you could easily modify this script to both create a static group and then modify it if you needed to.
It's just frustrating when it's like a lot of the time.
Sorry?
He tends to forget to tell me things too.
I'm having a little trouble hearing what you're saying. Am I doing something wrong, or was it a question?
Sorry, that was me. I'm having an issue. That's me. Sorry about that.
Oh, okay, no problem. Cool. So want to talk a little bit about this. This is the code that I've been using for generating Jamf API tokens. I'm sure you guys are using something similar. The only thing that you might want to take note of here is that I have a little function for generating the valid or determining the validity of the current token. Meaning it just checks the HTTP code of the token and returns that as okay or invalid. The reason this is useful is because you might be running a Jamf API thing that goes for longer than the life of the token. The tokens are valid for 30 minutes. So if you need to create a workflow like that that runs for longer than 30 minutes, you could use a function like this to determine when your token is about to be invalid and then issue a new one or re-up the same one. The other thing I want to point out here is that what I'm doing with these variables is I'm kind of concatenating the Jamf URLs and the API endpoints such that when I use them in the curl commands later in the script, I don't have to remember which endpoints go with which URLs. And I think that will be apparent more when I get down further here. And I already talked about the token. All right, the other thing I wanted to talk about here is the encoding of the Jamf API credentials. I've seen a couple of different versions of this. Basically, the requirement is that you just need to have the username and password separated by a colon on a single line. And that's what this echo-n does. And then you need to base 64 encode those credentials. And that form of your username and password, assuming that that user is an API user in Jamf, will generate a valid Jamf API token. All right. And this is where I wanted to talk about data types a little bit. One of the things that is probably confusing for new users to the Jamf API is that there is currently this V1, what is referred to as the Jamf API, and then there's the classic API. The classic API has always been able to output data as both XML and JSON, but it will only accept data as XML. The new Jamf API, the Jamf API, is JSON enabled. So you can do either one up and down, but what you have to realize is that when you're using a Jamf API token, you're going to be negotiating with the Jamf API, not the classic API, and that data is JSON, right? So in this script, I'm actually handling two different types of data from the API. I'm handling both JSON and XML just because that's how I wrote it. But the token is here, as you can see, I'm using JSON. Here, in order to actually get the data from Jamf, in other words, to push up an email address and return the computers that are associated to that email address in the Jamf database, I'm requesting that data as XML. And then, as you can see, I'm using XML lint to parse the output of that data, which is a technique that I've used for a long time. Almost every single one of my API scripts does the same thing. There's a lot of ways to do this. This is just a way to do it. But the point I really want to make here is that you might have to create a Jamf API workflow that handles more than one data type. Another thing I want to mention here is that, sorry about that. The email address needs to be formatted for a URL. In other words, there are encoding strings for URLs for things like spaces and special characters. So in this case, because I'm pushing up an email address to the Jamf API as a URL, I need to format it to handle the @ symbol, which is what that command does right there. And then this is the endpoint that I was talking about. It's user/email and then the email address. So one of the Jamf endpoints lets you look up a user by email address and then return the computers that are associated with that. It does that by looking at the user the username part of the record, the computer record. So it's a very, very handy endpoint. And here, I just want to mention that what I've got on the left there is the Jamf API documentation. If you're not familiar with it, you should make yourself familiar with it. Just go to the URL for your Jamf instance /API. You will be able to select the docs for either the classic API or version 1 of the API. And then you'll be able to test all of these commands with actual data. And you can't really break anything in there. They don't let you delete anything. You do need a valid API account, but you can get all sorts of data. It will show you a formatted version of the curl command that was used. It's a very, very good resource. And it's really the only way to generate these kind of custom API calls is by familiarizing yourself with this documentation. I highly recommend it. The last thing in the code here I want to talk about is these are the curl commands which I used to delete the existing static group, update the existing static group, print out my changes, and then invalidate the API token. And the reason I'm doing that is because at the end of this automation, right, you don't need the API token hanging out there. So once it's done its thing, you can kill the token by invalidating it, and that makes your session more secure. So the thing to note here is that the order or the HTTP methods that are used in these curl commands, I'm using a put to update the static group that I want to use. And what I'm doing is deleting it. I'm actually putting blank data in there. You can see in the -D part of the command. And then I'm verifying that everything was deleted by just printing it out. Then I'm updating it by uploading the concatenated list of computers that I've obtained from the previous API call. And then I'm printing that out with another get command to show me, hey, here's the list of computers, is this right? And the fact that I was doing this manually, it makes sense to do it this way because if there was anything wrong or if I had added a computer in the smart group that wasn't supposed to, static group that wasn't supposed to be there or vice versa, I could change it. Here is a demo of the script running. And the first thing you're going to see here is a little bit of OSA script or Apple script. And what this does is allows me to collect the username and password without having to store those strings in the script, which you should never, ever, ever do. And this will show you what happens when a failed authentication occurs. It doesn't give you a token and it just fails. Now this will work with the correct username and password. And you'll see that first it shows me that I have a valid token. And now what it's doing is inputting each email address that you see here. And it's telling me which computers in Jamf are associated with that email address. It also will print out at the bottom email addresses that didn't find any computers that were associated. And now it's running those commands that I showed you at the end. And I think I'm going to scroll back up here and show you what it did. The first thing it did is it printed out the blank group, meaning I've deleted everybody that was in there before. And now I'm updating it and I'm verifying the computers that were added or that were listed out above. Pretty straightforward. Again, like I said, there's nothing earth-shattering here, except maybe some of the ideas about connecting these data sources and the entire workflow of the project itself. And as you can see now in Jamf, the result is that those 4 computers have been added to this static group. That was my goal. That was my intention. All right, so epilogue. There was a single business unit in the company that was preventing basic authentication from being disabled at the server. If that business unit didn't need basic auth, this would never have been an issue. So in other words, somebody in the company came to me to solve their problem. This happens sometimes, and it's great to be able to provide solutions like this. It's a sign of, the endpoints are at the end of the chain. All of the poopy water flows downhill towards the endpoint guys. And it's great when the endpoints can be part of the solution and not considered the problem. When the endpoint engineers can fix something like this, it's a big win for everybody. This workflow ran in the environment for about 10 weeks, meaning I ran this script once a week for 10 weeks myself on Friday nights or whatever it was, because I have no life. Once that business unit resolved their issue, basic authentication was disabled at the server. Great. Over the course of time, about 250 users were prevented from using basic auth, which made the security people happy. And now that we have disabled basic authentication in the environment, all devices, iOS devices and computers are using modern auth to connect to Microsoft services. This is a joke for the Jamf people. This is what Jamf says in your case when they've closed it. Sometimes they say this even if they haven't solved it. Just letting you know that. Now, why shouldn't you do this? Well, the scope of this project was finite and it was time delimited. And I felt that, as I said here, the juice wasn't worth the squeeze to fully automate it. I could have built an integration between the Exchange service that would have automatically retrieved the email addresses and fully automated this solution so that I didn't have to touch it. But I knew it was going to be over in a matter of 2 months. So I didn't do that. So in this case, I did make myself a cog in the machine, but I only did that because I knew that I shouldn't, but made the determination that the scope of this project made it okay. These kind of scripts using these Jamf API tokens is perfectly secure. I'm not sure that everyone understands why using the token is more secure than using username and password, but let me just talk about that for a minute. If you're making the same curl command over and over and over again in your script, if you're using username and password, you're passing your username and password every single time to do that. And if there was a theoretical man in the middle, that would be bad. If you're using the token, you're passing the token every time. So it not only is it bad to have your password and your username written out in the script, but it's also bad to pass it every time to Jamf to get your data. So the token is just more secure all around. You should learn some sort of technique for using the tokens, and that's fine. What would be even better than what I did is instead of locally generating a token, you should use AWS Lambda or GitHub Action or Bitbucket or whatever your company has to do these sort of automation workflows to build this stuff. That's much better and really the only secure way to fully build an automation like this. And finally, the secrets, where do you store your username and password if you do something like that? GitHub Actions, frankly, the secrets is not viable for most companies because they only store passwords as base64. They don't really encrypt anything. So if you're using a system like that, you probably will be using AWS Secrets Manager or some other secrets solution that your company already uses. And maybe that thing has an API where it lets you pass your username and passwords securely to obtain the token. And that's really, I just wanted to say these two things at the end to say, the only secure way in an enterprise environment to build a workflow like this is to use some sort of real secrets manager and some sort of real runner. But what I've built here is perfectly secure. It's just kind of a halfway solution. That's it. So, like I said, I'm going to be posting some version of this script on the Rocketman GitHub. I wanted to talk real quick about links because these are things I've mentioned. Office Reset. If you don't know about these packages, these are created by Paul Bowden. Paul Bowden works for Microsoft. He's kind of the Mac guru at Microsoft. He has made all sorts of useful packages for resetting applications in the Office suite. If you don't know about these things, go to that site right now and look at them and download them. They're amazing and huge time savers. The developer.jamf.com API docs, highly recommended. Go to, as I said earlier, go to your Jamf instance.jamf.com/API, whatever your URL is. Look at the API docs. If you are interested in people say, how do I write an API script? The first place to look is the Jamf API documentation that exists in your own Jamf instance. Look at the endpoints, learn what they do, and you will be miles ahead in that game. Finally, there is an article written by Bill Smith on Jamf Nation on how to convert classic API scripts. What he means by classic is using basic username and password to the bearer token. Now, Bill's workflow will result in a much, much longer thing than mine. The thing that I posted is about 25 lines. The thing that Bill posted is about 150 lines to generate the token. It doesn't matter which one you use, they do the same thing. But I like to make code as short as I possibly can without harming its functionality. So that, that's because I'm psychotic. That's it. I'm done. So
Ooh,
questions?
well done.
And if you don't have any questions, maybe it was too simple. Maybe everyone gets it.
Or it was just way too much mind-blowing information and we need to sit on it for a few days.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you so much, Brock. I think that was
Absolutely.
very well done. I appreciate you for doing that.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, it was our pleasure. I know we're already over time, so we'll keep this quick, but thank you everybody for coming to this. We'll be posting for the next meetup here soon. We will be doing the LaunchPad live during the week of JNUC. We'll also be posting this presentation along with the supplemental documentation that Brock shared there on that last slide. We'll be posting that to our various, our YouTube channel and how we typically do. Trying to think, is there anything else? I think our next presentation, Caleb, I don't have that pulled up right in front of me, but that's going to be October 6th, right?
Yeah, and it's going to be a recap of JNUC.
Yep. So our next, the next LaunchPad meetup will be October 6th, and we'll be doing a JNUC refresher.
Nice.
So I'll be sending out the email for that, in the next couple of weeks, and then posting the link. We can also join all of these meetups on our website now. I'm not sure if any of you guys have seen that, but if you're ever looking for, hey, where's that LaunchPad invite? Those are all on our website as well now. We've got them scheduled out as far as we can foresee. Other than that, Brock, amazing job. Thank you so much.
Thanks
Hugo,
again.
Of course, Hugo, not to overshadow you. Thanks for doing the LaunchPad times. We look forward to
You're
seeing you
welcome.
guys either at JNUC or in our next Mac admin meetup. Other than that, everyone have a great weekend. Thanks so much for attending.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Brock. Thank you, guys.
Adios.